Is Vince McMahon unhappy with NXT? Now, social media, the wrestling world, the WWE universe, remember that's WWE's name, they love to call it, is still talking about and buzzing about Paul Heyman's removal from the Raw creative team as executive director. Now, Vince McMahon has already shown that he is prepared to make sudden changes, as Paul Heyman was replaced by Bruce Pritchard as Raw executive director last night. And Paul Davis at WrestlingNews.co is reported that Vince McMahon has also been frustrated with NXT's ratings recently. Now, it's not expected that Vince McMahon is going to make any changes at the moment, and Triple H is going to continue to oversee NXT for the time being. However, the company WWE is certainly looking to turn things around for NXT. There have been conversations about using more Raw and SmackDown talent on Wednesday nights, similar to Charlotte Flair's recent role in NXT. Now, NXT's ratings have been following the same pattern of Raw and SmackDown recently, in that due to the ongoing pandemic around the world, we're seeing a decline in ratings. NXT's viewership has declined by about 10.3% from an average of 736,000 live viewers before the pandemic to an average of 660,000. And to be honest, ever since NXT debuted and AEW Dynamite debuted in the same time slot, I would speculate, I don't have the numbers to hand, but Dynamite's won 90% of the time. Most weeks, Dynamite beats NXT. It's not always comfortably. This past week, we saw just AEW Dynamite defeat NXT by only a couple of thousand viewers. But every week, especially in 2020, not so much in 2019, but especially in 2020, AEW Dynamite has been beating NXT in the live ratings. So people had almost come to a conclusion now that it didn't matter. Vince McMahon didn't mind losing to AEW in the ratings. It wasn't expected that NXT was going to beat AEW, blah, blah, blah. I've always not believed that opinion. If you know anything about Vince McMahon, it's that he hates losing and refuses to lose. Every week he loses to AEW, that does something to him that is unquestionable, okay? He hates it. Deep down, it really hurts him that he's losing every week to another professional wrestling company, because according to Vince McMahon, there is only one professional wrestling company that people should watch. There's only one wrestling company that Vince McMahon watches, and that is WWE. So to have something with his brand on, his name on, his company on, to be beaten by another wrestling company, regardless of how well backed it is and on what network it is on, it just shouldn't happen in his eyes. So we could be seeing more SmackDown and Raw stars coming to NXT in the future. And it's a strange one to look at, to be honest, because I do think a problem with NXT is I do think they do lack star power. Now, you look at AEW, which you have to compare NXT to. Now, people say, oh, you can't compare the two. You can. They're in the same time slot. They provide the same product. They're just different companies. You can absolutely compare the two. The viewer has to compare the two on a Wednesday night when they decide who to watch live. So when you compare NXT to AEW, AEW certainly has more star power. It's without a shadow of a doubt. Now, they tried to bring star power back to NXT by bringing Finn Balor back to the brand, but in comparison to AEW, it's just not there. You know, over the last few weeks, they had Mike Tyson on AEW Dynamite, one of the biggest sports and boxing stars of all time. They've got Chris Jericho, a surefire Hall of Famer, multiple-time world champion, a guy who is on the top of his game at the moment, even though he's well into his 40s, close to 50. He is more relevant and doing his best work that he's arguably ever done in his career at the moment. You've got people like the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega and Cody Rhodes, who have been a proven draw in Japan, and now are proving to be a slight draw over here in the US and around the world. So the AEW, for me, absolutely has more star power than NXT. And you're looking at main roster people, when they're unhappy in WWE, are going to AEW. When you look at the likes of Brody Lee, Jon Moxley's former WWE champion. I can't believe I forgot even saying him. So they've got stars. Brody Lee comes over. He was a main roster guy. FTR coming over. They were a main roster tag team. And I know people are going to say, well, they were released. They were, WWE's loose ends. WWE didn't want them. First of all, WWE wanted Jon Moxley. They offered him a 5-year deal with a substantial pay rise. Same for Moxley, same for Revival. They didn't want to lose them because they know if they're used correctly, they can definitely be a draw. So without a shadow of a doubt, AEW has more star power than NXT. So by bringing some of the Raw and SmackDown stars over to NXT, will it help them? I think so. I think so because it will have more star power. Now, you obviously have to worry about the NXT superstars at that point. They're on that brand. It was previously a developmental brand. It isn't anymore, but it previously was. And the reason for that brand is to get them ready for Raw and SmackDown. If you bring the Raw and SmackDown stars over to NXT, what happens to them? Do they lose their way? Do they get prepared as they necessarily can? And does NXT just become exactly like Raw and SmackDown, which haven't been so great to watch anyway recently? But on the other side of things, does losing to AEW Dynamite every week hurt WWE's reputation? In Vince McMahon's eyes, it does. He will have to explain to his investors on his conference call and on his financial conference call every quarter, why is your brand NXT losing every week to another wrestling company on Wednesday nights? He has to explain it. So it's always going to be a problem for as long as NXT continues to lose. But I look at this and I hear these stories about Vince McMahon wanting to change things or not being happy with NXT's ratings. And I just think it was always a matter of time. Once that show became a property that was on cable TV in a primetime slot, made WWE money, was on the same network as Monday Night Raw, which is on the USA Network, which WWE has huge ties to and a huge historic relationship with, Vince would want to have some form of control over it. It's just how he is. So we've got to expect Vince's fingerprints at some point. Unless NXT was dominating AEW Dynamite in the ratings, Vince McMahon was always going to want his fingerprints on it eventually. NXT has just been this thing that has been so Vinceless for such a long period of time, which I don't know if necessarily is the truth. Vince is always there. You know, he might not be up the TV tapings and all that sort of stuff and the takeovers, but he's always talking to people in the background, whether it's on the phone or anything like that. By all accounts, he was talking to Triple H the first time they went on the air at the USA Network last year in 2019. So he's always been the guy in the background. I don't think that gets talked about enough, but it was always a matter of time. Once it becomes mainstream, once it gets on that cable network, and once it goes into prime time, and once it becomes a viable property that WWE can make and is making money off of it, Vince was always going to get his hands on it, and the Vince fingerprints are going to come sometime soon. So what can NXT do to change the tide here? What can Vince McMahon change about NXT, or what can Triple H change about NXT to turn the tide and start defeating AEW more regularly? Well, I don't think they're a million miles off. Like I said, they are losing most weeks to AEW Dynamite, but some weeks the difference is larger than others. Like I said, this past week, it's only a couple of thousand. So I don't think anything super drastic needs to be made to NXT. I think they've got the majority of the talent there, but I do think they could benefit from adding a few Raw and SmackDown stars. Now, I don't mean that Roman Reigns needs to come out every Wednesday night, and I don't think Braun Strowman or Drew McIntyre or anyone like that needs to come out every Wednesday night, but I think of the Raw and SmackDown stars that have proven they can be a draw, but are just not being used on Raw or SmackDown are the ones that you can benefit most from in NXT. I think of names like Ricochet. Ricochet was a North American champion. People were questioning why he didn't win the NXT championship during his run in NXT. Well, he's not doing anything on Raw. He's getting beaten in a tag team with Cedric Alexander by Shane Thorne and whoever his partner is. He's appearing on main event most weeks. This is the same guy that went against Brock Lesnar at Super Showdown in February and got destroyed in a couple of seconds. Now, I'm not the biggest Ricochet fan in terms of his character and in terms of his mic skills, but Ricochet was a proven draw for NXT, and he was over with the NXT fan base. Bringing someone like him back in, who now has a bit of main roster exposure, could help move the needle for NXT in the ratings. The same goes for Cedric Alexander. Cedric Alexander never really went through the NXT system. He came in as part of the Cruiserweight Classic, was on 205 Live, and made his way onto the WWE roster through there. At one point last year, Cedric Alexander was rumoured to get a big push and win the US Championship against AJ Styles. It didn't happen. He fell out of favour with Vince McMahon. He's no longer the shiny penny on the main roster. Bring him to NXT. He fits the style there and he can hone his skills. And look, people know him. He's a name. Other names I think of are names like Cesaro. Think of the matches that Cesaro had in NXT the first time round with the likes of Sami Zayn. And Cesaro was on the main roster at that time. He was on SmackDown and Raw most weeks, but he went to NXT because he liked to have the matches. One of the best matches ever. Still to this day in NXT's history is Sami Zayn versus Cesaro 2 out of 3 falls from the NXT TakeOver show. I believe the first one or the second one, or his NXT Arrival, something along that line. They had like a trilogy of matches which are just phenomenal to watch. So bring him to NXT. He's not being used properly, and he's been on the main roster now for nearly like 10 years. So he's got main roster exposure. People would be interested to see Cesaro on Wednesday nights. And like I said, he's not being used for anything. He was in a stable with Sami Zayn, ironically, on SmackDown, and he's just a body there. But he can be someone in NXT. He can be someone important, and he can have great matches, and people would be glad to see Cesaro doing something. And I know the, big fish in a small pond analogy comes, but maybe it would suit him better to be a bigger fish in the smaller pond that is NXT than get lost in the big pond on the main roster. So someone like Cesaro to come in. Another name that springs to mind is Shinsuke Nakamura. I mean, the way that they've butchered this guy since he made his way to the main roster in 2017 it's ridiculous, really. I don't even have the words to describe it. He came in with such... You go back and watch that Shinsuke Nakamura debut on the SmackDown after WrestleMania 33. The reaction he gets because this crowd was so excited to see Shinsuke Nakamura on SmackDown. They loved his work in NXT. They loved his matches in NXT. They're excited to see someone different like Shinsuke Nakamura. And he did get a relatively big push on at the start. He beats the likes of John Cena. He wins the Royal Rumble. But after that WWE Championship match against AJ Styles at WrestleMania 34, he just went down like a lead balloon. And ever since they've turned him heel, they've just... Obviously, Vince McMahon has decided, you know what? He doesn't do it for me. And I can't trust him, or I don't like that his promos aren't the best because he's not English, or his English isn't the best. His English is fine, by the way. And this idea that you need to be a great English speaker to cut a great promo is just ridiculous in 2020. You look at Asuka on Monday Night Raw, she's one of the best promos, and she barely speaks a word of English in her promos. Again, she can cut promos in English, not a problem, but you don't need to in 2020. Who cares? Put up subtitles. It's not insulting. Your audience should be able to read. You go to the UFC, you look at those promo packages, some of the fighters can't speak English. They'll do their promos and vignettes about the fight, they're hyping up the fight. They'll be in another language. You've got subtitles at the bottom. I'm invested. I'm watching this going, yeah, I love it. So that idea that you need to speak English to cut a great promo in 2020 is ridiculous anyway. But if you're not using him on SmackDown, like I said, the same with Cesaro. He was in a stable with Sami Zayn and Cesaro, not doing much, losing most of the time. Put him on NXT. He was a star in NXT. He was an NXT champion the first time, a 2-time NXT champion, was it? Shinsuke Nakamura could be something big, and he could be something again. He's local to the area. Put him on NXT. That's a name that could definitely help turn the tide. That's a name that could draw ratings. Oh, Shinsuke Nakamura's back in NXT. I need to watch that. And I'm not massively keen on this idea I'm about to talk about now, but everyone knows that Triple H and Shawn Michaels and Road Dogg are behind the scenes in NXT, and now sometimes they've appeared very, very, very infrequently in NXT. We've had Triple H in a segment with Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa. You get the odd cameo backstage. But if WWE's really serious about turning the tide, about drawing ratings, maybe Triple H, Shawn Michaels and Road Dogg need to become on-screen characters. Now, I'm not saying they need to be working matches, although I would be slightly interested to see Triple H face off against a Tommaso Ciampa or an Adam Cole or someone of that like. That would certainly get them over. And can you imagine Triple H wrestling in the Full Sail Arena? How cool would that be? Finn Balor's called NXT like Broadway before, WWE's Hollywood film. I'd hardly call it Hollywood film, but the analogy works that NXT's like Broadway. Imagine having Triple H appear on Broadway. And when I say they can be on-screen characters, they don't have to appear in every segment, and they don't have to appear every single week. Maybe just, one segment here or there, but more than they're doing now. And people will say, well, he's going to be burying younger talent, etc., etc. But once you made that move to Wednesday nights on the USA Network in prime time, and you're going up against another wrestling company, you will do what you can to win. Because it's no longer developmental, it's the main roster now. And if they want to call it that, they need to pull out the big guns, in my opinion. I think also that they need to promote NXT better on Raw and SmackDown. They were doing the right thing when they had the build-up to Survivor Series last year, and you had Raw and SmackDown stars appear on Survivor Series and NXT stars appearing on both Raw and SmackDown, and you had NXT go over on Raw and SmackDown. You established a brand as this credible third brand. It isn't enough to just have this one advert saying watch NXT this week, because they've been doing that for years, even prior to NXT being on the USA Network. So I think they need to promote the show better on Raw and SmackDown. And I think they need to have more main roster interactions with NXT stars. As I mentioned, I think the best time for NXT in terms of the ratings was around Survivor Series last year. Why was that? That's because NXT stars were appearing on Raw and SmackDown regularly and winning, but they were also staying on NXT. So Vince McMahon's talking a lot about, oh, maybe we should have Raw and SmackDown stars on NXT to boost the ratings that way. Maybe you have the top NXT stars appear on Raw and SmackDown, but they stay on NXT too. You know, if you're going to abolish this whole brand extension this time around, once again, if Raw and SmackDown writing teams are going to be merged into one, overseen by Bruce Pritchard, why not just have the NXT stars appear on Raw and SmackDown too, but their main shows on Wednesday nights? If Adam Cole becomes a regular on either Raw or SmackDown, but he's like, I'm still the NXT champion, I'm going to be there every single Wednesday night, your casual viewer that doesn't watch NXT on a Wednesday, they just watch Raw and SmackDown, they'll be like, well, I'm invested in this Adam Cole character, I'm invested in the Undisputed Era, maybe I should watch Wednesday nights more often, maybe I should watch NXT. I think that's definitely a way to go. And I think this mixing of rosters, logistically, maybe it was difficult before because NXT's always been through Full Sail. It's never gone anywhere else apart from the Performance Center, and that was still in Florida. So that was still in Orlando. But now that Raw and SmackDown and NXT are all being taped in Florida due to the pandemic, logistically, it's more likely and it's more possible. It's the same location. The talent is all in one area anyway, so you don't have talent coming in from all over the place. It'd be difficult if Raw's in Wyoming doing a TV taping to come straight into Florida the next night or anything like that. That's difficult. But now, logistically, it's a lot easier. And if you have this main roster talent come in and put over the NXT talent, you could definitely help make new stars and also re-establish the old stars that aren't doing so great on Raw and SmackDown. Like I said, I just worry you can't bury or have the NXT stars lose all the time. I think that's kind of hurt NXT when on Raw and SmackDown during this pandemic era, is that every squash match is an NXT talent. Now, I know it's not an important NXT talent, and I know it's not an NXT talent that was appearing on every episode of NXT, but to the casual viewer, you just get that stigma that, oh, NXT is a developmental brand still. Because every time we see a squash match, they go, so-and-so from NXT, and they lose. That's what it feels like. And it's those little things that WWE needs to cut out as well. So I do expect changes to come to NXT in the future. As I mentioned, Vince McMahon is certainly more involved with things now, especially on the creative side of things now that the XFL is over and not coming back. Vince McMahon is going to be micromanaging and getting his hands on everything. So I wouldn't be surprised. Like I said, there's going to be no major changes for NXT at the moment, but I would expect some to come in the next couple of months for sure. But what do you think? What can NXT do to improve? What can they do to turn the tide? Is Vince McMahon unhappy with NXT? Let me know the changes you would make to NXT in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe and like and share. You can subscribe to Wrestling News 365 by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button for you to watch, along with another video for you to watch. You can go to our channel and subscribe to us there also, and look at all the videos we've uploaded here to YouTube. Make sure you follow us on all of our social media platforms too, at 365Wrestle on Twitter and at WrestleNews365 on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak for you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.